Before the fall of humanity, there was a perfect world, a world untouched by sin. Imagine a place where death didn't exist, where every breath was filled with peace and every step was guided by a loving Creator. But what if I told you, everything we know about life, suffering, and the very purpose of our existence changed because of one choice that shattered the perfect harmony of the Garden of Eden? What if Adam and Eve never sinned? What would the world look like? What if the gates of Eden never closed and the tree of life was never out of reach? How would humanity have evolved if we lived in a world where everything was perfect? No suffering, no disease, no death, just unbroken communion with God. But what if all of this came at a price we could never pay? Until now, in this video you will discover the hidden truths behind humanity's greatest choice, the consequences we've been living with for millennia, and why redemption became a necessity. Imagine a world where sickness doesn't exist, a world where we live eternally, never aging, never fearing death. What would we accomplish in a world free of decay? Would we still need to struggle? Would our hearts still know the depths of love and compassion? Without pain, how would we learn to grow, to persevere, to truly understand what it means to be human? Could we truly be human without the choice to fall? This world, without the fall, sounds like paradise, doesn't it? Yet, there's something you might not realize. A paradise without struggle, without hardship, might mean a paradise without depth, without the contrast of light and dark, joy and sorrow, good and evil. How would we recognize the beauty of God's love? In this journey, we will uncover the mystery of why sin entered the world and the truth about the human spirit that only suffering could reveal. Through this revelation, you will understand why God's love for us is not just seen, but felt, in the moments of pain, of loss, of redemption. This is the story of how one choice changed everything, and why it matters so much today. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this mystery, exploring a world that could have been, and one that still waits for us to reclaim. The question isn't just what if, it's what will we choose now. Let's explore the profound truths that have been hidden in plain sight, and why they hold the key to your spiritual journey. Eden. A perfect world. Imagine for a moment a world untouched by pain, untouched by time itself. A place where every step you take is guided by love, where every breath is filled with peace. This was Eden, the first home of humanity. It was a world where death had no power, where sickness was an unknown, and where every relationship, whether with creation or with God, was pure, unbroken, and perfect. The Garden of Eden was not just a place, it was a living testament to the goodness of God's creation. It was vibrant with life, lush trees heavy with fruit, rivers flowing with crystal clarity, and skies painted in colors no human eye had ever seen before. Every corner of this paradise was woven with harmony, and at its heart was an intimate, personal relationship with the Creator. Imagine walking in the cool of the day with God Himself, conversing with Him, learning from Him, and simply being in His presence. This perfect world wasn't just about beauty, it was about purpose. Adam, the first man, was given the task of tending this divine creation. His work wasn't a burden, it was a joy. It wasn't something to escape. It was a calling to partner with God in sustaining and growing the beauty around him. There was no sweat of the brow, no frustration, no exhaustion. It was work that fulfilled, a life of effortless joy. And at the center of this perfect world were two trees, symbols of a divine choice, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life offered eternal, unbroken life. Adam and Eve could have lived forever in this perfect garden, drawing life from this tree, free from the decay that now marks our existence. It was God's gift of immortality, available to them as long as they remained in his perfect will. But there was also the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God's command was simple: do not eat from this tree. It was the one boundary in the entire garden. It wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't to trap them. It was to give them the most sacred gift of all: free will. This tree represented choice. It was a choice to trust in God's wisdom and remain in harmony with his design, or to choose to define right and wrong on their own terms. It was a test of love, of loyalty, and of trust. But imagine, what if that perfect world had continued? What if Adam and Eve had chosen to remain faithful, to continue walking with God, to never doubt his wisdom? What would the world be like today if the fall had never happened? What would humanity be, and where would we be now? In Eden, there was no shame, no guilt, no fear. They were naked and unashamed, living in perfect transparency with each other and with their Creator. There was no veil between them and God. They saw him face to face. There was no barrier between them and nature. Everything lived in perfect harmony. It was a life of love, of beauty, of peace, a life that God intended from the very beginning. But it all rested on one thing: choice, the point of divergence, Adam and Eve's choice. And then came the serpent, the most cunning of all the creatures in the garden, a being whose voice was smooth, persuasive, and filled with lies. He didn't immediately try to convince them to act in rebellion. No, he started with something more subtle, a seed of doubt. "Did God really say?" he asked Eve, whispering lies into her heart. He painted God's command not as a loving boundary, but as a restrictive law. "You will not surely die," he said, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The serpent's voice promised wisdom, power, and the chance to be like God. He offered the very thing that God had kept from them: the knowledge of good and evil. In one moment, the decision was made. The fruit looked pleasing to the eye, desirable for gaining wisdom, and tempting for the promise it held. Eve, standing at the edge of the choice, took a bite, and then Adam, who had been standing beside her, chose to eat as well. In that moment, the perfect world shattered. The gates of Eden closed, the ground cursed, and death entered the world. The bond between God and man was broken. But what if that moment had been different? What if Adam and Eve had stood firm in their trust in God? And what if they had refused the serpent's lies and chosen loyalty to the Creator instead of following their own desires? Imagine the world they could have created, a world where choice was always used to draw closer to God. Without sin, there would have been no suffering. Without sin, there would have been no death, no pain, no heartache. Humanity could have lived forever in perfect harmony with God and each other. Relationships would have been unmarred by conflict or selfishness. The earth would have remained as it was, perfect, unspoiled, and full of life. But that choice was made. The first humans chose to define good and evil for themselves, and in doing so, they gave humanity the most powerful, painful gift: the ability to choose against God. Had they chosen differently, we would live in a world without death. We would live in a world where sickness was an impossibility, where the very essence of life was sustained by God Himself. The tree of life would still stand, offering immortality to those who walk in the Creator's will. But that tree remains out of reach, lost to humanity because of one choice that changed everything. And this, my friend, is the reality we now live in. A world where we must live by faith, a world where we don't walk daily with God but trust in His promises, a world where death, disease, and suffering are all too real, but also a world where God has not abandoned us. Through the choice of Adam and Eve, We are given the knowledge of good and evil, the ability to see both light and dark, and through that, the opportunity to choose once again, this time to return to the Creator. So, what would have happened if Adam and Eve never sinned? We would have lived in paradise forever. But we must also ask, is paradise enough? Would we know the depths of God's love without the struggle? Would we understand grace without the fall? Would we even recognize the beauty of redemption without the choice to fall and then rise again? This is the question, the tension, the mystery we live in, and it's the choice we continue to face today. Let's continue on this journey together as we explore the profound impact of that one choice. Stay with me, and let's dive deeper into what happened when Adam and Eve made their fateful decision and how it echoes through our lives today. The consequences of rejecting sin. What happens when we reject the very thing that was supposed to guide us? When Adam and Eve chose to ignore God's command, they set into motion consequences that would ripple through all of humanity for eternity. The world they once knew, perfect, innocent, and filled with peace, was suddenly shattered. It wasn't just a momentary slip-up, it was a choice that broke the foundation of creation itself. Imagine the perfect harmony of a garden, where every living thing thrived in unity. But with their choice, that harmony crumbled. The ground was cursed, death entered the world, and pain became a constant companion. Can you picture the moment it all shifted? The innocence, the pure communion with God, was lost. The perfect relationship between humanity and the Creator was now tainted, and every generation to come would feel the weight of that first disobedience. The joy of life, the peace of knowing who you are and why you're here, was replaced by fear, confusion, and an aching desire to fill the void left by sin. When sin entered the world, it didn't just affect Adam and Eve, it infected everything. No longer would humans walk in the cool of the day with God. No longer would they know life without the threat of death. And no longer would their hearts be pure and free from the stains of guilt and shame. But here's the catch. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a consequence of a choice. A choice that God gave them the freedom to make, knowing that with it would come the ability to choose Him again. The choice to reject sin wasn't just about one moment. It was about the way humanity would now face the world. A world filled with suffering, loss, and despair, but also a world where redemption would be possible. That was the twist. Through their rejection of sin, humanity now had the opportunity to rise above it, to be restored, to choose to be reconciled with God. But imagine, just for a moment, a world where that choice had never been made, a world where sin never entered, a world where humans never experienced the sting of death or the heartbreak of loss. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? But without those trials, could we ever know true love? Could we understand the depth of grace? Would we have ever learned the power of forgiveness if we had never needed it? This is the paradox. The consequences of rejecting sin brought both the pain of the world and the hope of redemption. Without sin, there would be no need for redemption, no need for the Savior, and no need for the incredible sacrificial love that would one day be shown through Jesus Christ. But in that brokenness, something beautiful began to emerge. The choice that Adam and Eve made didn't just destroy everything. It opened the door for humanity to be redeemed. Without sin, there would have been no need for a Savior, no need for the powerful story of grace and forgiveness that would come to define our relationship with God. The consequences of rejecting sin were severe, yes, but they also set the stage for a divine love story that we can't even begin to comprehend. Redemption not needed. But here's the twist. The world we live in, this fallen world, wouldn't have needed redemption if Adam and Eve had never sinned. Think about that for a moment. Without sin, there would have been no need for Jesus to come to earth, to live a perfect life, and to die a brutal death. Without the fall, we would never have experienced the mind-blowing, soul-shaking depth of God's love for us. There would be no cross, no resurrection, no incredible story of victory over death. In a world without sin, we would have no reason to look at ourselves and say, "I need saving." We wouldn't know the weight of guilt, the sting of loss, or the desperation of being separated from God. We wouldn't understand the magnitude of God's love for us, because we would have never needed that love in the way we do now. It's easy to think that the fall was the worst thing that could have happened, but without it, we would have missed out on something even more incredible. The chance to experience God's grace, the chance to see the power of His redemption, the chance to be rescued. The fall, as devastating as it was, opened the door to the most beautiful story ever told. A story of love so deep it would go to the cross for us. A story of redemption that would change everything. You see, the choice to reject sin, while devastating, also made redemption possible. Without the fall, there would be no need for the sacrifice. Without sin, there would be no resurrection. Without brokenness, there would be no healing. The fall may have created a world full of pain, but it also created a world where we could choose redemption. We could choose God, not because we had to, but because we needed to. And in that need, we would see God's greatest gift of all, the love that gave everything to bring us back to Himself. What does this mean for us today? It means that even though we live in a broken world, we can choose to rise above it. We can choose redemption. We can choose the love of a Savior who came to heal our brokenness, who came to restore what was lost, and who gave His life so that we could have the chance to live in the peace and harmony of Eden once again. Without sin, there would be no redemption, and that, in itself, is a gift too powerful to ignore. So let's reflect. What do we do with this gift of redemption? Will we choose to accept it, to rise above the consequences of the fall, and to walk with God once again? Or will we continue to live in the brokenness, never knowing the fullness of His love? The choice is ours. The consequences of rejecting sin. What happens when humanity takes the forbidden path? When Adam and Eve chose disobedience, they unleashed a tidal wave of consequences that echoed through the centuries, forever altering the world. The consequences were not just personal, they were cosmic. The earth that was once a perfect reflection of God's will became a broken shadow of what it was meant to be. The harmony, peace, and eternal joy of Eden were replaced with turmoil, pain, and death. The world that God had created with His own hands was now tainted by the poison of sin. Death entered the world like a thief in the night, stealing away innocence, joy, and peace. Imagine the sharp contrast. One moment, humanity walked with God in the cool of the day. The next, they found themselves exiled from the garden with a deep sense of loss that could never be fully healed. Every generation since has felt that sting, the pain of being separated from the Creator, the weight of living in a broken world, where everything once perfect is now in decay. But the consequences didn't just affect the world physically. The most profound impact was spiritual. A deep chasm formed between humanity and God. No longer could people walk in the garden with Him. No longer could they experience the intimate communion that Adam and Eve once enjoyed. The perfect relationship was shattered. Guilt and shame entered their hearts, forcing them to hide, to cover up, to run from the one who loved them. And that, my friend, is where our story begins. What would life be like if we had never rejected God's command? What if the fall had never happened? What if Adam and Eve had chosen to trust the goodness of God rather than listen to the serpent's lies? Would we be living in a world of eternal peace, free from suffering and death? It sounds like paradise, doesn't it? But let's consider this. A world without sin, a world without struggle, might also be a world without growth. Without sin, there would be no need for redemption. Without pain, would we even know love? Without hardship, how could we understand grace? In rejecting sin, humanity might have rejected the very thing that makes us human, the choice to rise above brokenness, to experience the depth of God's mercy, and to choose Him again despite the fall. And here lies the paradox. The consequences of rejecting sin set the stage for the greatest act of love the world would ever know, the love of a Savior who would come to heal what was broken. So, as much as we mourn the fall, we also find hope in it. Without the darkness, we could never fully experience the light. Without sin, we could never understand the power of God's redemption. Redemption not needed. What if Adam and Eve had never sinned? Would we have still needed a Savior? Would there have been a need for Jesus to come into the world, to live a perfect life, to die a brutal death on a cross, and to rise again? The simple answer is no. If sin had never entered the world, redemption would not have been necessary. But here's where it gets deep. Because in a world without sin, we would have never known the depth of God's love. We would have never known the sacrifice, the pain, and the overwhelming grace that only comes through redemption. Redemption wasn't just a necessity because of sin, it became a gift because of it. Without the fall, we would never have known God's unconditional love. We would have never understood the heart of a Savior who, knowing our deepest flaws and failures, chose to give His life for ours. Imagine a world where everything is perfect, where there is no sickness, no death, and no sin. It sounds like heaven. But there's something missing, a personal connection. In this world of perfection, there would be no need for forgiveness, no need for mercy. And without the need for forgiveness, how could we ever experience the incredible joy of being forgiven? Without mercy, how could we understand the depth of grace? But redemption, this gift of grace, exists because of the fall. Without the fall, there would be no Savior, and without a Savior, there would be no cross. The cross, where love and justice collide, where grace flows like a river, would never have been necessary. But in the brokenness of humanity's choice, redemption was born. We would have never understood the power of God's love if we hadn't needed it. Without the fall, we would have never tasted the sweetness of salvation, the grace of being made whole again. We would have never known what it meant to be truly saved, to be lifted from the depths of despair and placed into the light of God's love. So, as much as we wish for a perfect world, a world without sin, there's something deeper at play here. The very thing that caused our separation from God is the same thing that brought about the possibility of restoration. The very thing that plunged humanity into darkness is the same thing that opened the door to the most powerful love the world has ever known. Imagine that. Without sin, without the fall, we would have never known the Savior. Without the choice to fall, we would have never had the opportunity to rise. We would have never understood the power of God's love because we would never have seen its true depth. And isn't that the greatest gift of all? To understand that love, not as something we deserve, but as something we need, a love so deep that it reaches into the darkest parts of our souls and says, "You are worth saving." So in the brokenness there is beauty, in the fall there is redemption, and in the redemption there is love, real love, the kind of love that changes everything. The fall may have shattered our world, but it also paved the way for us to understand the magnitude of God's love for us. The fall, as painful as it was, gave birth to the greatest story ever told, the story of a Savior who came to redeem us from the depths of our brokenness, to heal our hearts, and to bring us back to the paradise we were meant to live in all along. And here we are, given the choice to accept the redemption that was made possible through that fall. Will we accept it? Will we choose to rise above our brokenness, to accept the love that God offers us, and to walk in the grace that has been given? Or will we continue to live in the darkness, never knowing the power of His redemption? The choice is ours, and in that choice, we find the true meaning of life, of love, and of God's incredible grace. Imagine standing at the edge of eternity, where everything you know and feel is wrapped in a divine embrace, and your every breath is aligned with the will of the Creator. This was the life that Adam and Eve were given, perfection in every sense of the word, a world without sin, without decay, without pain or fear. They lived in a paradise, walking with God Himself in the Garden of Eden. Their lives were untainted, their hearts pure, their purpose clear. It was a dream world, untouched by time or sorrow. But then, that one moment came, a moment when everything changed. The serpent whispered lies, sown with the promise of wisdom and the allure of becoming like God. They chose to reach for what was forbidden. They chose to step away from the God who gave them everything, to embrace the unknown. And in that single choice, the gates of Eden were closed forever. The world they knew shattered, and from that moment on, humanity would never again experience that kind of perfect unity with God. What happened after that? The consequences of their actions didn't just affect them. It impacted every generation to come. Sin entered the world like a disease, spreading through humanity, infecting hearts, minds, and relationships. The peace of Eden was replaced with struggles. Death entered, and pain became a part of the human experience. But even in the midst of all this suffering, there was something more profound at play, something that would change everything for humanity: the choice of redemption. What if I told you that in our brokenness, there is beauty? That in the chaos of this fallen world, God's love shines through in ways we could never have imagined without the fall. The very thing that shattered the world is the same thing that made redemption possible. If sin had never entered, we would never have understood the magnitude of God's grace. If Adam and Eve had never fallen, we would have never known the depths of His mercy. Through their mistake, through the mess we find ourselves in, God provided a way for us to rise again. Through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we are offered the greatest gift humanity has ever known, a chance at redemption. Can you imagine what it would have been like to never experience sorrow, to never feel the sting of loss or the weight of failure? It sounds like a paradise, doesn't it? But think about this. Without the struggles, the pain, the heartbreak, would we know what it means to truly love? Without the brokenness, could we fully appreciate God's grace? Without knowing what it's like to be lost, could we ever understand the beauty of being found? God's love is not just an abstract idea. It's not just a warm feeling we read about in the Bible. It's real, and it's transformative. But to understand the depth of His love, we first need to understand our need for it. The fall brought suffering, but it also brought the possibility of redemption. Without sin, there would be no Savior. Without brokenness, there would be no healing. Without death, there would be no resurrection. The very fact that we can experience God's love in its full, sacrificial form is because of the choice that Adam and Eve made. It's because of that one moment when they reached for the forbidden fruit. Now, here we stand. We are no longer in Eden. We are no longer in that perfect, unbroken world. But we are still offered something more. We are offered a relationship with God, not because we deserve it, but because of His incredible mercy and grace. Through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, we are given a chance to walk with God again. We are given a chance to be redeemed from the brokenness that began in Eden and to live in the light of His love. And this love, it's powerful, it's transformative, it's healing. It's the kind of love that restores what was lost, that heals what was broken, and that makes all things new. This is the love that we are called to accept, to embrace, and to share with others. If you have ever felt lost, if you've ever felt like there is no hope, I want you to know this. God's love is stronger than any darkness, stronger than any pain, stronger than any fear. His love is the answer to the brokenness we feel, and it's available to you right now. You don't have to wait for tomorrow. You don't have to clean yourself up first. God's love is unconditional, and it's waiting for you to receive it. So what do we do with this love? We don't just keep it for ourselves. We share it. We spread it. We live it out every day. We love the people around us, even when it's hard. We forgive the people who've hurt us, even when it doesn't make sense. We trust in God's plan, even when we don't understand it, because that's what redemption looks like. It looks like choosing God, even when everything in this world tries to pull us away from Him. It looks like walking in the light, even when the darkness seems overwhelming. It looks like living in the hope that one day God will restore all things, and we will once again experience the paradise that was lost. This is the power of the fall, the power to change everything. It shows us our need for God, and it reveals His plan to restore us. Through the choice that started it all, God provided a way for us to be redeemed. And through that redemption, we can experience His love in its fullest form. If this video has touched your heart, if it has helped you see God's love in a new light, I invite you to support this journey of spreading His word. If you found peace or light in this message, I ask you to consider subscribing, liking, and commenting to help others find the same hope you found. Every small action, every little bit of support means the world to me and helps me continue sharing the message of God's love with more people. Your support is a gift that enables me to keep creating, keep sharing, and keep spreading His word to those who need it most. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being part of this journey. Your support makes all the difference, and together, we can help spread God's light in a world that desperately needs it.